Admiral Vextal stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the small blue planet grow larger on the main screen. His 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he counted the ships in his fleet. 847 battlecruisers, each, one powerful enough to destroy entire cities with a single blast. This would be easy. Admiral, his second-in-command hissed through sharp teeth. The planet shows primitive technology signatures. Nuclear weapons, basic rockets, simple communication satellites. They cannot possibly resist us. Vextel nodded his massive head. The galactic hegemony had conquered 47 worlds before this one. Each time the same pattern repeated. The primitive species would panic, try to fight with their weak weapons, then surrender when they realized how hopeless their situation was. This planet called Earth would be no different. On Earth, Captain Hyun-woo Kim sat in the Seoul Defense Command Center staring at his computer screen. The numbers made no sense at first, then they made too much sense and his blood ran cold. "Lieutenant Daun?" he called to the woman sitting at the next desk. "Are you seeing this?" Daun Park looked up from her own screen, her face pale. 800 ships, sir, maybe more. They just appeared at the edge of our solar system. Hyun-woo grabbed his phone and dialed a number he hoped he would never have to use. The line connected after one ring. "This is Professor Min-ho Lee," came the calm voice on the other end. "Professor, this is Captain Kim. Code Black. I repeat, Code Black." There was silence for 3 seconds. Then Min-ho spoke again, and his voice had changed completely. "Understood, Captain. Activate all monitoring stations. I'm implementing Protocol 7 immediately." Around the world, similar phone calls were being made. In underground bunkers that most governments didn't know existed, people were waking up computers that had been sleeping for years. Director So Young. Choi received her call while eating breakfast in her apartment in Geneva. She dropped her coffee cup and ran to her car. The news networks were already going crazy. Reporters stood in front of government buildings, screaming into microphones about invasion fleets and alien contact. People crowded around television screens in stores and restaurants, watching grainy telescope images of the massive ships hanging in space beyond Mars. But in the hidden facilities, something very different was happening. Colonel Jin Woo-han walked into a room that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Dozens of people sat at computer stations, their fingers flying over keyboards. Giant screens showed star maps and ship positions and numbers that changed every second. "Status report," Jinwoo said to the nearest technician. "All deep space sensors are online, sir. We're tracking every ship in their fleet. They're maintaining standard formation, moving at 0.7 light speed. Estimated arrival time is 18 hours. Jinwoo nodded and walked to a phone marked with red tape. He picked it up and dialed. On the moon, Dr. Yoon Ji-yoon was already suited up and walking through corridors that weren't supposed to exist. The official Luna base was small, just a research station with 12 people. But behind a hidden door, another facility stretched deep into the moon's surface. Yoonji had been waiting 30 years for this day. She reached the central control room and began typing commands into a computer. Around her, machines that had been silent for decades began to hum with power. Through the thick windows, she could see structures rising from the lunar surface, structures that had been disguised as mining equipment and communication dishes. Back on Earth, the panic was spreading. Stock markets crashed. Governments called emergency meetings. Military bases went to their highest alert levels. Soldiers loaded weapons and climbed into tanks, knowing their guns would be useless against spaceships but doing it anyway because it was all they knew how to do. Admiral Vextal watched all of this with amusement. His spy satellites had been observing Earth for months, learning about human behavior and technology. Everything was going exactly as expected. The humans were terrified and confused, running around like insects when someone kicked their nest. "Shall we begin the bombardment, Admiral?" asked his weapons officer. "Not yet," Vextal replied. "Let them suffer in fear for a few more hours. It makes the conquest more satisfying." But some humans weren't running around in panic. In a facility, buried under the Rocky Mountains, technicians were bringing online systems that had cost more money than most countries' entire military budgets. Commander Taemin Song stood in front of a massive computer screen, watching as green lights appeared, one by one across a map of the solar system. "Luna Base is online," reported a technician. "Asteroid mining stations are responding," said another. "Jupiter orbital platforms are ready," called a third. Timon allowed himself a small smile. The reporters and politicians might be panicking, but the people who really mattered had been preparing for this day since before most of them were born. President Mi Young-song sat in a bunker that was supposed to protect her from nuclear war. But today she wasn't thinking about protection. She was thinking about the phone call she would make in exactly 17 hours and 32 minutes. The alien fleet continued its approach, confident and unstoppable. Admiral Vextal reviewed his battle plans one more time. First, they would destroy all military installations from orbit. Then they would demand surrender. If the humans refused, they would begin destroying cities until the survivors begged for mercy. It was a strategy that had worked perfectly 47 times before. But as the alien ships crossed into Earth's solar system, hidden sensors tracked their every movement. Computer programs that had been written by the smartest humans alive began calculating trajectories and timing sequences. And in facilities scattered across the solar system, weapons that had never been tested in combat began their final preparations. The invasion was about to begin, but Admiral Vextal had no idea what was really waiting for him. Admiral Vextal's fleet reached Earth's outer atmosphere right on schedule. He stood on his bridge looking down at the blue and green world below. It looked so peaceful, so helpless. Time to change that. "Open all communication channels," he ordered. The bridge crew worked quickly, and soon every television, radio, and internet connection on Earth was carrying the same signal. Vextal's image appeared on screens around the world, a tall, gray creature with 4 glowing eyes and teeth, like broken glass. "People of Earth," his voice boomed in perfect English. "I am Admiral Vextal of the Galactic Hegemony. Your planet is now under our control. You have one choice: surrender completely, or watch your cities burn from space. You have 24 hours to decide." The transmission ended, leaving billions of humans staring at blank screens. Within minutes, Director So Young Choi was standing in the main communication center in Geneva. She looked calm, almost relaxed, as technicians prepared to send humanity's response. "Are we ready?" she asked. "Yes, Director. All channels are open." So Young smiled and activated the microphone. "Admiral Vextal," she said in a steady voice. "This is Director Choi of Earth's Unified Defense Council. We have received your message. We request a 24-hour ceasefire to consider your terms and prepare our response. Surely a civilization as advanced as yours can grant us this small courtesy." Up on the flagship, Vextal's officers looked at each other in surprise. They had expected screaming, begging, maybe threats about primitive nuclear weapons. Instead, this human female sounded like she was negotiating a business deal. "Admiral," said his second-in-command, "this is unusual behavior. Most species immediately surrender or attack us with everything they have." Vextal waved a clawed hand dismissively. "They're buying time to panic properly. Let them have their 24 hours. It will make no difference." But on Earth, those 24 hours made all the difference in the galaxy. The moment the ceasefire began, Colonel Jin Wuhan walked into a room full of the world's most advanced computers. Screens showed real-time positions of every alien ship, their energy signatures, their weapons configurations. Information that should have been impossible for primitive humans to gather. "Begin Phase 2 activation," Jin Wu ordered. Around the solar system, equipment that had been disguised for decades started coming online. On Mars, what looked like terraforming equipment revealed hidden weapon systems. In the asteroid belt, mining stations deployed arrays that had nothing to do with digging rocks. Dr. Yoon Ji-yoon stood in the Lunar Command Center, watching displays that showed construction projects across the solar system, projects that had been hidden from Earth's own population for 30 years. "All stations report ready status," she said into her headset. "Lunar defense grid is fully operational." "Confirmed," came the reply from Earth. "Jupiter stations are online. Asteroid field weapons are in position." Saturn orbital platforms report ready. On Earth, news broadcasts showed the expected chaos. Military leaders gave press conferences about humanity's dire situation. World leaders held emergency meetings and spoke about evacuation plans and underground shelters. Scientists appeared on television to explain how hopeless it was to fight against such advanced technology. But in hidden facilities, different conversations were taking place. Captain Eugene Lee sat in an underground bunker, looking at screens that showed the real positions of human forces. Forces that extended much further than anyone imagined. All deep space monitoring stations confirm, she reported. We have tracking, data on every ship in their fleet, weapon signatures analyzed, shield frequencies mapped, propulsion systems identified. Professor Min-Ho Lee reviewed the data that had been collected over the past 18 hours. The alien technology was impressive, but it followed patterns that human scientists had predicted years earlier. Their shields are designed for energy weapons, he told his team. Plasma blasts, laser attacks, particle beams. They're not built to stop kinetic projectiles. What about their armor? Asked a young technician. Strong against heat and radiation, Min-Ho replied. But physics is physics. Throw something heavy enough, fast enough, and armor becomes irrelevant. Admiral Vextal spent the ceasefire period reviewing intelligence reports about Earth's defenses. His spy probes had mapped every military base, every nuclear weapon, every satellite. The humans had a few hundred nuclear missiles, some primitive space fighters, and communication satellites that couldn't even travel faster than light. Sir, reported his intelligence officer, our scans show increased activity at their military bases. They appear to be mobilizing their armies. Vextal laughed, a sound like breaking metal. Let them gather their toy soldiers. It will make the conquest more entertaining. But the scans were missing something important. Hidden beneath electromagnetic interference from Earth's natural magnetic field, quantum encrypted communications were passing between facilities that didn't officially exist. Commander Tae-min Song coordinated with teams on 12 different worlds that weren't supposed to have human colonies for another 100 years. Confirm operational status, he said into his secure communicator. Alpha Base confirms ready, came a voice from a star system 40 light-years away. Beta Station online, said another voice from the opposite direction. Gamma Colony standing by, reported a third. As the 24-hour deadline approached, Director So-Young Choi prepared for her second communication with Admiral Vextal. But this time she wasn't alone in the communications center. General Woo Jin Kim stood beside her along with Admiral Seok Jin Lim and Dr. Han-Yul Park. Are all systems in position? So, Young asked. Every weapon system is operational, confirmed Woo Jin. All personnel are at battle stations. Deep space assets are ready, added Seok Jin. Strike fleets are in position. Intelligence networks confirm target acquisition, said Han-Yul. We know where all their important facilities are. So Young nodded and activated the communication system once more. Around the galaxy, both human and alien forces prepared for what they thought would be a long, bloody war. None of them realized it would be over in 15 minutes. The 24-hour ceasefire ended at exactly 14 SOG Universal Standard Time. Admiral Vextal looked at his chronometer and smiled with all 4 rows of teeth. Time is up, he announced to his bridge crew. Begin orbital bombardment. Target their major cities first. Yes, Admiral, replied his weapons officer. First wave ships are moving into attack position. 200 battle cruisers broke away from the main fleet, their massive hulls gleaming as they dropped toward Earth's atmosphere. Each ship carried enough firepower to turn a continent into glass. Admiral Vextal watched them descend already, planning which human cities would serve as examples to the others. In the Lunar Command Center, Commander Tae-min Song watched the same ships on his display screen. He had been waiting for this moment his entire career. Enemy ships entering the kill zone, reported a technician. All stations confirm ready, said another. Tae-min reached for a red switch that had never been used in combat. His hand was perfectly steady as he flipped it. Execute Protocol Prometheus. Across the lunar surface, structures that had disguised themselves as mining equipment for 30 years suddenly revealed their true nature. Massive railgun batteries rose from hidden underground chambers. Each weapon was 3 kilometers long and powered by fusion reactors that could light up entire cities. But these weren't ordinary railguns. The projectiles they fired were tungsten rods weighing 10 tons each, accelerated to 15% of light speed. At that velocity, a small piece of metal had more destructive power than a nuclear bomb. The first salvo fired simultaneously from 40 different positions on the moon. 40 tungsten rods, each moving at 45,000 kilometers per second, streaked toward the descending alien ships. Admiral Vextal's first warning came when his ship's defensive system started screaming alerts. "Admiral," shouted his sensor officer, "incoming projectiles, velocity. That's impossible." "What's the velocity?" Vextal demanded. 15% light speed, sir. Impact in 3 seconds. Vextal's 4 eyes widened in shock. No primitive species should be able to accelerate anything to those speeds. "Raise shields. All ships, evasive maneuvers." But the hegemony's shields had been designed to stop energy weapons and explosive missiles. They were useless against solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. The tungsten rods passed through the shields like they weren't there. The first battlecruiser struck by a railgun projectile simply ceased to exist. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to a 50-megaton nuclear explosion. The ship's hull, armor, and everyone inside were converted to plasma in a fraction of a second. 39 more ships died in the same instant. "Impossible," Vextal screamed. "Our intelligence said they had primitive technology." But the lunar attack was just the beginning. On Mars, Captain Eugene Lee activated the second part of Earth's defense plan. "Asteroid field weapons are hot," she reported, initiating gravitational slingshot sequences. For months, human engineers had been attaching fusion charges to asteroids throughout the belt. Not to blow them up, but to push them in carefully, calculated directions. Now those asteroids, some as large as city blocks, were being launched toward the alien fleet using the gravity of planets as slingshots. But these weren't random rocks thrown at the enemy. Each asteroid had been equipped with guidance systems and small maneuvering thrusters. They were guided missiles the size of mountains, moving at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour. Admiral Vextal watched his fleet's formation fall apart as captains tried to avoid both the continuing railgun strikes from the moon and the incoming asteroid bombardment. Ships collided with each other in their panic to escape. Some fired their weapons wildly, destroying their own allies instead of the human projectiles. "Sir," reported his communications officer, his voice shaking. "We've lost 200 ships in the first minute." "How?" Vextal demanded. "How did they hide this technology?" The answer came from Earth itself. Dr. Hanuel Park's face appeared on screens throughout the alien fleet, broadcasting on frequencies the hegemony thought were secure. "Admiral Vextal," she said calmly, "allow me to introduce you to humanity's real capabilities." Behind her, displays showed technical readouts that made the Admiral's blood freeze. Faster than light travel, interstellar colonies, weapon systems that made the hegemony's arsenal look like stone knives. "Your intelligence was correct," Hanuel continued. "Earth does have primitive nuclear weapons and basic rockets. We kept those systems operational specifically for species like yours to observe. What you didn't see were our real defenses." As if to emphasize her point, another wave of railgun fire lanced out from the moon. 20 more alien ships vanished, in flashes of superheated plasma. "Impossible," Vextal repeated. "Our scouts surveyed the system for months." "Your scouts saw what we wanted them to see," Hanuel replied. "Every satellite you thought was a communication relay was actually a sensor platform. Every space station you dismissed as primitive was actually a weapons emplacement. We've been watching you since the moment you entered our galaxy." On screens throughout the alien fleet, star maps appeared showing the true extent of human expansion. Colonies on 47 worlds, fleets of ships using technology the hegemony had never imagined. Cities built inside artificial habitats that could house billions of people. "You see, Admiral," Hanuel continued, "humanity achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. We've been expanding across the galaxy ever since. But we learned something important from studying species like yours. Sometimes it's better to appear weak than to advertise your strength. Another asteroid impact destroyed 3 more alien ships. The survivors were now in full retreat, but the human weapons followed them with ruthless precision. General Woojin Kim appeared beside Hanul on the broadcast. Admiral, your forces are now facing the integrated defense network of 12-star systems. Every weapon that's firing at you has been in position for years, waiting for someone like you to attack Earth. This is still just our defensive capability, added Admiral Seok Jin Lim. Our offensive fleets departed for your home systems 3 months ago. The moment our deep space sensors detected your approach, Vextal felt his 4 hearts skip beats. Our home systems, but that's impossible. You don't have faster-than-light communications. We don't need them, Seok Jin replied with a cold smile. We know where your worlds are because we've been watching your species for longer than you've known we exist. On the tactical display, the alien fleet's losses had reached catastrophic levels. 500 ships destroyed in less than 10 minutes. The survivors were scattered across the solar system, trying desperately to escape weapons that could track them across interplanetary distances. Commander Taemin Song fired another railgun salvo from the moon. 8 more alien ships joined the expanding clouds of superheated debris. Admiral, came a panicked voice from one of the surviving ships. We have to retreat. They're picking us off one by one. But retreat was no longer an option. Human strike forces had emerged from hidden bases throughout the solar system. Ships that made the alien battlecruisers look like toys surrounded the survivors. Admiral Vextal stared at his displays in disbelief. In 15 minutes, the most powerful fleet the galactic hegemony had ever assembled had been reduced to scattered wreckage, and the humans were just getting started. Admiral Vextal's flagship shook as another human weapon struck its shields. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, but there was no escape from the relentless assault. In 15 minutes, his mighty fleet of 847 battlecruisers had been reduced to fewer than 400 survivors, scattered and defenseless. Admiral, his communications officer called out, we're receiving a transmission from Earth. It's being broadcast to the entire galaxy. Put it on screen, Vextal ordered, his voice hollow with defeat. General Woojin Kim appeared on the main display, standing in what looked like the command center of a space station. But not just any space station. Behind him, through massive windows, the curve of Earth was visible. This facility was in orbit around the planet, yet their scouts had never detected it. People of the galaxy, Woojin began, his voice calm and professional. This is General Kim of the Terran Defense Force. What you are witnessing today is not just the defense of Earth, but the liberation of 47 worlds from hegemony oppression. Across the galaxy, species that had been conquered by the hegemony watched in amazement as the primitive humans systematically destroyed the fleet that had enslaved them for generations. For the past 50 years, Woojin continued, humanity has been preparing for this moment. We knew that a species like the hegemony existed. We studied your methods, your technology, your weaknesses, and we made ourselves ready. Dr. Hanul, Park appeared beside the general, holding a datapad that displayed technical specifications. Admiral Vextal, your shields are designed to deflect energy-based weapons, plasma cannons, laser arrays, particle beams, but they cannot stop solid matter traveling at relativistic speeds. As if to prove her point, another railgun salvo lanced out from the moon. 5 more hegemony ships vanished in balls of nuclear fire. Your armor, Hanul continued, is excellent against heat and radiation. It can survive the plasma temperatures of your own weapons, but it cannot withstand the kinetic energy of a 10-ton tungsten rod moving at 15% of light speed. Admiral Vextal watched his tactical display as more ships disappeared. Each loss represented thousands of his people, warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds, now reduced to vapor by weapons they had never imagined. How? He transmitted back to the humans. How did you hide this from us? President Mi Young-song appeared on the broadcast now, speaking from what was clearly the Oval Office. But behind her desk, instead of flags, were star charts showing human colonies across the galaxy. Admiral, the answer is simple, she said. We gave you exactly what you expected to see. Your scouts observed our nuclear weapons, our chemical rockets, our primitive satellites. All real, all functional, all deliberately maintained to present the image of a species just beginning to explore space. The display behind her changed to show a timeline of human expansion. Colonies established on dozens of worlds, all hidden from galactic observation. Ships traveling between star systems, using technology that made hegemony vessels look like sailing boats. While you were watching our public space program struggle to reach Mars, Mi Young continued, our real colonies were already terraforming worlds in 12 different star systems. While you analyzed our television broadcasts and internet communications, our deep space monitoring networks were tracking every ship in your fleet. Commander Taemin Song's voice came over the communication channel from the lunar base. Admiral, we've been expecting you for 3 years. The moment your advanced scouts entered our galaxy, we began preparing for your arrival. But your technology, Vextal protested. Our intelligence said you only achieved nuclear fusion 50 years ago. We achieved nuclear fusion a century ago, replied Dr. Hanul Park. We achieved faster than light travel 50 years ago. We achieved artificial gravity 30 years ago. We simply didn't advertise these accomplishments to the galaxy. The tactical display showed human ships decloaking throughout the solar system. Vessels that had been invisible to hegemony sensors suddenly appeared, surrounding the surviving alien fleet. Each ship was larger and more advanced than anything in the hegemony navy. The International Space Station, you observed, added Captain Eugene Lee from Mars, was indeed our first orbital habitat, but it was also a decoy. Our real orbital installations have been hidden behind advanced stealth technology. As she spoke, massive structures became visible around Earth. Space stations the size of cities, orbital shipyards, defensive platforms bristling with weapons that made the lunar railguns look primitive. An entire spacefaring civilization that had been invisible until this moment. Admiral, came a new voice. This is Ambassador Jong-Soo Kim, speaking from Titan Base. The view changed to show a man standing on the surface of Saturn's largest moon. But the landscape behind him had been transformed. Cities stretched to the horizon, their lights twinkling under artificial atmospheric domes. Titan wasn't just a human outpost. It was a fully developed world. What you're seeing here, Jong-Soo continued, exists on every major body in our solar system. Mars has a population of 50 million. Jupiter's moons house another 100 million. The asteroid belt contains mining operations that produce more raw materials than your entire empire. Admiral Vextal felt his remaining heart skip beats. The scope of the deception was beyond anything he had imagined. The primitive species his empire had planned to enslave was actually the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever seen. But the most important thing you need to understand, Admiral, said President Mi Young Song, is that we're not just defending ourselves. 3 months ago, when our sensors detected your fleet's approach, we dispatched strike forces to every major hegemony world. The star map behind her changed again, showing the positions of human fleets throughout hegemony space. Dozens of task forces, each larger than the fleet that had just been destroyed at Earth, were already in position around the aliens' most important planets. At this moment, continued Admiral Seok-Jin Lim, human forces are surrounding your homeworld, your major colonies, your military installations, and your industrial centers. They have been waiting in concealment for this signal. He held up a small device. The signal that your invasion fleet has been neutralized. Vextal's communications officer looked up from his station, his face pale with terror. Admiral, we're receiving reports from across the Empire. Human fleets are decloaking around every major world. They're demanding unconditional surrender. The scope of the disaster became clear. This hadn't been a defensive action at all. It had been a carefully planned military operation designed to destroy the hegemony's ability to wage war. In 15 minutes, humanity had not only saved themselves but conquered an empire that had ruled the galaxy for centuries. Admiral Vextal, said General Woo Jin Kim, you have one choice left. Order your remaining ships to stand down and surrender, or watch them be destroyed along with every hegemony installation in the galaxy. As Vextal looked at his tactical display, showing the pitiful remnants of his once mighty fleet surrounded by superior human forces, he realized that the age of hegemony rule was over. A new power had emerged in the galaxy, and they had announced themselves in the most dramatic way possible. Admiral Vextal stared at the tactical display on his bridge. 14 minutes and 37 seconds had passed since the ceasefire ended. In that time, his fleet of 847 battlecruisers had been reduced to 312 scattered, damaged survivors. Around him, his officers waited for orders that could determine the fate of their entire civilization. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we have confirmation from across the Empire. Human fleets are positioned around every major hegemony world. They're not attacking, but they're demanding immediate surrender of all military forces." Vextal's 4 eyes closed in defeat. In his long military career, he had conquered worlds, enslaved entire species, and built an empire that stretched across thousands of light years. Now, in less than 15 minutes, it was all ending. "Open a channel to the human forces," he said quietly. President Myung Song appeared on his screen, but she was no longer alone. Behind her stood representatives from dozens of species, races that the hegemony had conquered over the centuries. Their faces showed a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Admiral Vextal," Myung said, "I'm here with ambassadors from the Kelrathi Republic, the Zephyrian Union, the Crystalline Collective, and 44 other worlds that your empire has oppressed. They're here to witness the end of hegemony rule." Vextal noticed something else in the background, beings he didn't recognize, species that weren't in the hegemony's databases of conquered worlds. "Those are representatives from the Free Worlds Alliance," Myung continued, following his gaze. 67 civilizations that your empire never found because they were under our protection. Humanity has been shielding them from your expansion for the past 30 years. The scope of the deception became even clearer. Not only had humans hidden their own capabilities, but they had been secretly protecting other species from hegemony conquest. The primitive world of Earth had been operating a shadow empire of its own. "What are your terms?" Vextal asked, knowing he had no choice but to accept whatever the humans demanded. Ambassador Jong-soo Kim stepped forward. "Complete and immediate cessation of all military operations, withdrawal of hegemony forces from all occupied worlds, reparations, to be paid to every species your empire has harmed, and the establishment of a new galactic council, where no single species holds dominance over others." "And if we refuse?" Vextal asked, though he already knew the answer. Admiral Seok Jin Lim smiled coldly. "Admiral, your homeworld is currently surrounded by a human task force of 200 ships, each one more advanced than your flagship. Your choice is simple: agree to our terms, or watch your civilization be destroyed as thoroughly as your invasion. Fleet." Reports continued to flood in from across the galaxy. On the hegemony homeworld, massive human dreadnoughts had appeared in orbit without warning. On every major colony, hegemony fleets found themselves outgunned and outnumbered by forces that had seemingly materialized from nowhere. But the humans weren't just demonstrating their military superiority. Dr. Ha Newell Park appeared on communication channels throughout hegemony space, broadcasting to civilian populations that had lived under military rule for generations. "People of the former hegemony worlds," she said, "humanity offers you freedom and protection. We will help you establish democratic governments, rebuild your economies, and take your place as equals in the galactic community." Captain Hyunwoo Kim, back in the Seoul Defense Command Center, watched as reports came in from around the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for centuries were celebrating in the streets. Hegemony military commanders were surrendering without resistance. The transition was happening so quickly it seemed almost impossible. "Sir," Lieutenant Da-Eun Park said, looking up from her station, "we're receiving surrender signals from 94% of all hegemony military units. The remaining 6% are requesting terms." Hyunwoo shook his head in amazement. 15 minutes of combat had accomplished what thousands of years of rebellion and resistance had failed to achieve. The galactic hegemony was surrendering completely. TO. His flagship, Admiral Vextal, made the hardest decision of his life. He activated the fleet-wide communication system. "All hegemony forces," he broadcast, "this is Admiral Vextal. By my authority as Supreme Fleet Commander, I order the immediate surrender of all military units. Comply with human demands and await further instructions. The response was immediate. Across the galaxy, hegemony weapons powered down. Ships that had terrorized countless worlds for centuries fell silent. An empire that had seemed invincible had been defeated in the time it takes to eat lunch. President Mi-young-song addressed the galaxy once more, but this time her message was one of hope rather than war. People of all worlds, she said, today marks the beginning of a new era. The Galactic Council will be established within 30 days, with representatives from every species. No longer will any single civilization dominate others through force. We will work together as equals to build a better future for all. Behind her, the view had changed to show Earth as it really was. Massive orbital installations, fleets of starships, cities that stretched from continent to continent. The primitive world that had been scheduled for conquest was revealed as the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever known. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from Professor Min-ho Lee, speaking from a research station orbiting Jupiter. For those wondering how we achieved this level of technology so quickly, he said, the answer is simple. We've been in contact with 43 different species over the past century. Many of the technologies you've seen today were developed through peaceful cooperation and knowledge sharing. The star map behind him showed a network of connections spanning the galaxy, trade routes, communication links, scientific exchanges, all hidden from hegemony observation. While the aliens had been building an empire through conquest, humanity had been building one through friendship and mutual cooperation. 6 months later, Captain Hyun-woo Kim sat in his office in Seoul, writing his final report on the war that lasted 15 minutes. Outside his window, he could see ships from dozens of different worlds landing at the new Galactic Council headquarters that had been built in record time. The former hegemony worlds were adjusting well to freedom. Most had established democratic governments with human assistance. Trade was flowing between species that had been enemies for centuries. Scientific cooperation was advancing at an unprecedented rate. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in the former hegemony military officers. Many of them, including Admiral Vextel himself, had requested asylum on Earth. They were now working with human officials to establish the new Galactic Defense Force, a military organization dedicated to protecting all species from future threats. Hyun-woo finished his report and looked out the window again. A group of young aliens, former hegemony citizens who had come to Earth to study, were playing in the park below. They were laughing and running around like children everywhere, regardless of species. The invasion that was supposed to end human civilization had instead begun a new chapter for the entire galaxy. In 15 minutes, humanity had proven that sometimes the best way to win a war is to be so overwhelmingly prepared that the enemy has no choice but to surrender. And in the end, everyone was better off for it.